Hello, welcome and thank you for joining us. We're so excited to share this research with you today, and I'm really excited to hear your questions and get your feedback and learn a little more from our colleagues from around the world. Today, you'll hear from our research partner, Derrick Feldman, who will take you on a deeper dive into our findings. Derrick is recognized as a leading researcher in cause engagement. He is Managing Director of Influence SG and Managing Director of Ad Council Edge, the Ad Council's strategic consulting division. He leads the research team for Influencing Young America to Act, a study on how young adults 18 through 30 are influenced by and influence others to support social causes and issues. And you will also hear from some of my colleagues that I really respect and appreciate them taking the time to join us today. Alana Jorge. Alana is a project director at Atados, a Brazilian institution that connects enterprises, volunteers, and nonprofit organizations. Atados has 216,000 people in its volunteering platform, more than 3,000 NGOs, and its projects benefited more than 200,000 people last year. And then my colleague Shalabh Saha. Shalabh began his journey co-founding iVolunteer, and I have to say that before the pandemic, we were all in India, and Shalabh was a wonderful host with his colleagues in India. iVolunteer is the largest social enterprise for formal volunteering in India. And during the pandemic, Shalabh led iVolunteer to respond to the migrant crisis, a unique but major impact of the pandemic, followed by supporting oxygen supply in remote regions. So we're going to be really excited to hear from our two colleagues. Regarding the research today, points of light commitment to supporting nonprofits and companies take meaningful actions within the community is because we believe in the power of people. In 2019, we noticed a shift in the way people were engaging, and that they were not just volunteering, but they were doing more. They were taking action and living a civically engaged life. With our network, we have social impact organizations in over 38 countries around the world, and it is important to understand social impact and civic engagement globally. So we wanted to take a deeper dive in understanding these attitudes. Over the past 3 years, we have examined the state of civic engagement in our ever-changing world. And we understand that what we want to know, what is important to people, how are they engaging, what are the barriers they faced? And in 2020, we released our first strategic research. And it was really about all generations, and particularly millennials. It was conducted right before the pandemic, and we've been able to gain additional research to see how people are engaging. In 2021, we focused specifically on millennials, and now they are at the largest generation. They're the largest generation that are coming of age. And they've been deeply impacted by the pandemic, as we all have. This year, our research expanded globally. Having a global understanding is more important than ever. We see through the shared experience of the pandemic and other crises that are occurring throughout our world, how connected we are as a world globally. Over the past 2 years, our world has had a shared experience that has touched us all. To move forward in creating this new world that we want to live in, it's important for us to understand the similarities and differences, how people see themselves, what issues they care about, how we can get everyone to work together. Our hope today is that this research, the insights that Derrick Feldman will share with you, and the insights that my colleagues Alana and Shalabh will share will help you gain a better understanding of how we can work together. And for those of you who are working in and with companies that have a global footprint, perhaps this will be additional insights to help guide your work and impact in community. So without further ado, please welcome Derrick Feldman. Derrick, so nice to see you.
Yes, same here. Thank you so much. And Natalie, much appreciated for all the partnership and work together on this important research. Everybody joining us today, thank you again for spending some time talking through the research that we've conducted over the course of the last year. And also, I think, a chance for us to discuss it because when you get data points, it's always one of those you sort of want to get the contextual understanding of what that really means on the ground. So I'm thankful that we have our panel today too as well. I want to start a little bit around how we frame some of the research in general. The research that we conducted was to also get a better understanding around the engagement, participation, perceptions, and attitudes around the Points of Light Civic Circle. That Civic Circle, as you see on the screen right now, is an opportunity. I always say it's sort of through our institutions, we get the opportunity as individuals to express our voice, to donate, to listen and learn, use the power of our vote, work, purchasing power, our consumer interests as well. The Civic Circle truly represents opportunities for individuals to influence change in their communities. And they do that through our companies, they do that through their local communities, through our institutions and organizations like yourselves. We get the opportunity to help others understand how they can activate through the Civic Circle. So throughout the research, not only did we discover what issues, both our social issues and looking at some of the issues that each country should take as part of an interest of where the general population is, but also these actions through the Civic Circle, which ones are the most influential and the actions that they're taken. And this really helps us understand as leaders how we can fully help everybody realize their potential through the Civic Circle. I'll start with social issues in general. As you see on the screen right now, we asked both sort of general population samples in 4 major countries, the United States, the UK, India, and Brazil, about their top social issues. And of course, we had a battery of different social issues for them to select from. And as you will see on the screen right now, there were 3 top issues across sort of in a global perspective: healthcare, education, and the environment and climate. And as you see right now, there are differences amongst the various countries. And specifically, that black line, as you see on the left hand, is the global aggregate number if I put all the countries together. But there is going to be some consistencies as we see, not only here on this sort of slide, but throughout the research, in which that there were some commonalities around the US and the UK, and there were also some commonalities in and around countries, India and Brazil. But overall note, healthcare, education, the environment and climate have been the top issues that of concern of those individuals within each of the countries. Now, we also wanted to understand how the pandemic has affected them, both personally and those around them. And as we look at it, obviously one's health, the health of others around me, the health of our communities, and my personal mental and physical well-being have all been impacted. In this sort of scatter plot chart that you see right here, you're going to notice, let's start with the left-hand side and move our way to the right, that there is a deep concern, not just for oneself, but really for others. I think this goes to the spirit of the Civic Circle environment we were just talking about, that the health of people in their community is a top concern, that not so much as not just mine, but the health of others around them, within their communities, within their neighborhoods, where they live, work, and play. Now, nearly half of the respondents, as you can see here, look at the health of others as a very significant piece. And as we go further out, other key pieces include finances, one's own mental health, and the mental health of their family, in addition to physical health as well. Of course, we had a battery of different things for them to choose from. And I think the biggest thing to kind of take away here is concern for one another as it comes to the health of our neighbors, our friends, people where we live, work, and play, and also one's own financial position and situation in where they are right now, given the pandemic. Now, I must also sort of comment around mental health overall too, which is consistently and seen as what we have seen in some other reports and research around the globe as to what the pandemic has done due to lockdowns and other kind of factors sort of contributing into those elements. On the next screen, you're going to see here a different way in which we frame some of the social issues. We wanted to understand, are these social issues similar to our political issues? And the reason that we ask these separately is sort of a part of a strategic research reason, is to understand, one, the social issues in which that they can feel like they can address, but also in which that political leaders should be addressing from a policy standpoint as well. You're going to see on the screen right now, environment and climate, education, COVID-19, healthcare, and criminal and social justice. And as I mentioned before, some commonalities between the US and UK, and specifically around India and Brazil. But overall, these top 5 political issues are driving interest of what political leaders should be addressing in those countries. And if you think about that comparison to the social issues as well, health and environment and climate and education top in there, but of course, COVID-19 and social and racial justice and criminal justice as well. And as we look through here, it's just sort of one note to consider that while social and racial justice is sort of towards that top 5, but in the 5th position, note that each of these issues also has an aspect of equity and racial justice associated with it too as well. So kind of keep that in mind, that it's in the 5th, but it's threaded throughout some of these other social issues too. So I sort of give this to as a big takeaway as we see in this sort of issues space before we venture into some actions overall and deeper into the civic circle. First and foremost is that we know that the civic circle presents an opportunity of one to express influence through companies, through their purchasing, on their own with organizations as well. And as we look at those social issues, keep in mind that most of those social issues we talked about, those top 3, have an expression in using much of sort of social media, utilizing a lot of learning capabilities as well, and helping others. And so when we look at our social issues and our actions, when we think about that influence and behavior that individuals are already taking, it really is to learn more and to try to express some education and knowledge amongst peers and networks, sort of that social media dominance there. As I get into some of the graphics here, a couple things to keep in mind. India by far dominated the social media use for every issue. US and UK overall was the least. You're going to notice that as we get into here. Taking time to learn about an issue is and continues to be one of the major elements related to the civic circle. Natalie mentioned that we did research as well previous to this, and that was a key finding in that last one is that general population is looking to learn more about these issues as well. And so one of the things that we need to consider is who are they turning to learn more? This is the role that you as organizations and companies can really play. And obviously intentionally helping somebody else through these issues sort of is a thread and through line as well. Now, when we look at the last 30 days preceding the survey, so we always ask that question in the last 30 rather than just last 6 or a year, because things are a little bit more top of mind in the last 30. Interest and actions related to mental health were actually the lowest in the US and the UK. But keep in mind too, when you see this data points in a few slides here, is that no matter what the action was, India was consistently more engaged than others, and the UK by far was the least out of the 4 countries that were a part of the global research. So let's go ahead and dive in. You're going to see a lot of charts here. I sort of wanted to get those out there before you see something like this on the screen. But let's sort of start left to right, and I'm going to point out some key things for you. On the left-hand side, you're going to notice the posted or sharing of social content on platforms. That's using one's voice to express either opinion or knowledge about the issue. historically pretty much one of the key actions that we often see in the civic circle. It's an opportunity to express one's approval, or anti-position on a social issue as well. And then taking the time to learn about an issue through trusted resources as well is another key action. Helping through volunteerism, donating, of course, there, and looking at it. And I want to call out purchase power. You're going to see my cursor there. These are the top three on the right-hand side on the top line there. Starting to increase or stopping purchasing due to sort of alignment with the company's positions on values and also social issues. So where does this all bring us? Obviously there's a lot of other things below there on that line, but I'm going to focus on the top data points here. What we find through the civic circle that we see both globally and within all the, both globally as well as in this, and we've seen in previous reports here, is that using one's voice through social platforms is very key. Listening and learning, and obviously volunteerism. After we get past that, we see things like shifting one's purchasing or consumer behavior based upon values or social issue positioning, and getting deeper and deeper into sort of the political marches and rallies and other elements as you see on the screen as well. Each of these provides an opportunity. And I think what's important to understand is that while we were asking what actions they have taken, one area to dive deeper and deeper into is truly understanding whether all of these opportunities are available to everybody, and an opportunity for them to sort of express their voice and their power and their influence as well. So one thing to note is that while these are the top, it doesn't necessarily mean everyone has received or have been prompted through a call to action to perform all of these. And I think that's sort of one of our recommendations as we look at leaders to how do we ensure that we use the full aspect of the civic circle to prompt civic action and engagement, and not rely on the typical ways that we see general populations or individuals within these countries participating in social issues. As you see also on the screen right now, it's just a breakdown of the top actions taken by the top 5 social issues as well. I just want to note a couple key things here is that as you look through all of these, there's not a ton of difference among our social issues. Social content, learning more, intentionally helping others. The only difference that at times we'll see, obviously, is in poverty, homelessness, a difference of donation of goods and services to an organization. So all in all, this was fairly consistent across all social issues, across countries, amongst those top 5. And as we look at one key thing too is around voting, which was also a part of the civic circle I wanted to bring into there. And the US and UK respondents ranked actually voting as the most important activity they could do to support social change in their country. That was a little bit different at times in other areas as well. But I just sort of put this from an influence perspective too. That kind of gets us to the action promoting more actions. One of the hypotheses that we as researchers in civic engagement are always looking at is when one person is nudged to perform action and they participate in action, does that consistency increase frequency over time? And essentially in the questions that we were asking in the survey instrument is to try to understand if one is more action, or if they're participating in more actions, if that also increases their participation sort of in many of these social issues. And so what we were able to discover is that the more actions the individual took, the more active they were utilizing the civic circle, engaging in each of the social issues too as well. And as leaders, this really helps sort of you think through your approaches. I would say that getting someone active through the civic circle can create more action and opportunities for engagement as they remain engaged and involved in the issues. So therefore, as you look at the ways in which you campaign or engage individuals, it's sort of leading in and continually presenting opportunities of action that fully express the civic circle in the future. So all in all, big takeaway here is the more actions they took, the more action-oriented they were, and they were more active through the use of the larger scope of the civic circle. As you'll see on the screen right now, we wanted to understand also the opposite, which is, why are you not participating in social issues? What is the reason? And of course, there's so many different batteries of questions or responses that we provided, and also open-ended opportunities too. And what we discovered here right now is as follows. One is that we still have sort of fear and challenge related to COVID-19, and as you'll see right there, comfortability around vaccination. But I think one of the most important key pieces on this screen right now, and you'll see it on the right-hand side in the notes there, is around the perception of financial support being necessary to be involved in sort of utilizing the civic circle in a way. And so one of the things that was a major highlight in the report, as well as I point out here, is there is a perception and attitude within all of the countries in which that if the individual doesn't have the financial resources to be involved, they then perceive that as their major reason for not getting involved, not necessarily looking at all of the other ways that their voice, their time, their energy and power can have influence overall. So this is a very, very key opportunity for us as leaders to help sort of change that perception that financial is key to engagement, but rather presenting more the full scale and scope of the civic circle. Of course, how could we not talk about volunteering? I just share this on here right now, is that they're planning to volunteer more than they did in the pandemic. We saw some differences, as you see, similarities across India and Brazil on the right-hand side versus sort of our US and UK folks overall. And what I also think is key here is understanding what that kind of volunteerism will be. On the bottom right-hand side of your screen, where it says virtual volunteering will be the primary way that they volunteer, by far, this is where we saw the most engagement and similarities across all countries. Obviously, India higher, but all the other countries in the global aggregate, by far, virtual volunteering is the preference and the way in which that they want to volunteer in the next month. You can see on the right-hand side how that compares in sort of looking at it from both an online and or virtually in the next month too. So all in all, when we're thinking about virtual volunteering, a very, very key piece. Now let's turn our attention to the corporate sector and our colleagues and friends. And as we were looking at it, we wanted to understand what is the role of the corporation today, especially now given when we were fielding this in earlier April as well, and first part of the year, to really understand not only the role in this stage of the pandemic, but what does that forward. When we think about the expectations of consumers, there is sort of a social mindset expectation that consumers have of the companies in which that they get products, goods, and services with, and also those within their communities. You're going to see the top three expectations on the screen right now. First and foremost is that the company would determine a product's impact both on society and the environment too as well. This was pretty consistent across in general, in which that the product, good, or service should not have any harm to society and or environment. The second thing was around accountability, actually. And in that one is taking responsibility and corrective action when mistakes occur, essentially being authentic and transparent, forthcoming when issues arise, and addressing them as appropriately. And one of the other things too that we actually saw in the top three, a little bit stronger in our India, Brazil countries versus US, UK, is meeting with others to see who might be affected by social issues, really getting to know consumers and the public who are impacted by the issues in which that products and services might be affected, might be affecting, and or getting to understand more in their communities the types of individuals in and around their neighborhoods, as well as sort of the consumer base in and around communities within the country. So very, very, very key thing. I will also say that more than 80% expect companies to address social issues in their countries overall, more than 80%. When you look at it from this perspective, we wanted to ask, what do you think companies should be doing when it comes to social issues, right? So the other one was expectations. Now let's talk specifically about social issues. By far, sharing and promoting of social issues, they thought was really, really key. Now, we had a battery of different options and opportunities for them to select from. And this is very key to understand here, because we had options to consider in which the company is really leading and participating and engaging. We had other ones in which the consumer was asked themselves to engage on behalf of the company, in which that they were requested by the company to do so as well. And then lastly, obviously, the political spectrum and other leaders and community leaders around them. What you see on the screen right now is the top things, that top activities consumer expected of companies. So that promotion, that distribution, and engaging the employees by far was the top. Now, interestingly enough, what you don't see on the screen right now, which is in our report, we share this very, very key finding, is that individuals within all of the countries did not express interest in participating on behalf of the company in social issues, but they still expected those companies to engage in social issues. So essentially what that means is, while don't expect me to participate on your behalf, I do expect you to be active and involved on social issues overall. This is a key finding we express a little bit further in the research report too, if you get a chance to read it. Very, very key in understanding both the difference between expectation and roles that we're seeking from the general public as it comes to how companies engage in social issues. You're also going to see some other additional opportunities that I wanted to share with you, things like volunteering one's time for because a company asked you to. See, it's lower than the other categories. Financially supporting a social issue, participating in a march or rally because a company asked you to. These are in the lower percentiles as compared to the others. So just wanted to share that overall. And that sort of gets us to the piece around sincerity and transparency. One of the things we wanted to understand is how will you, as the general public, sort of measure the company's role and responsibility when it comes to social issues? And it wasn't necessarily, we thought the top thing would be that they were continuing on in their commitments and so forth. But in reality, the top one was around employees, specifically how they treat their employees, providing fair pay and good benefits, paid sick, will determine whether or not they're living up to their values. So treating of employees was a very, very key thing. Of course, you'll see on the screen right now some of the other ways. But all of these typically engage employees in some manner in which that the company is supporting, getting behind, and engaging employees and treating them fair through wage, employee benefits, and so forth. In addition to that, we had a battery full of questions related to things like expression of their commitments and tangibility of those on a regular basis, not as high as all the employee pieces. And you're going to see there was some even higher expectation when it came to the Brazil side on the right-hand side, pretty much predominantly throughout all of them. So I want to wrap up here because we're going to have a great discussion next, and I'll turn over to Natalie in a second, which is as follows. One is our social and personal issues definitely merged, of course, and our political issues too as well, right? We talked about some of that education and as well as health and so on. Individuals really, really want to look at both the education environment and healthcare. And I would say that as we see the civic circle as an opportunity for so many ways to express influence and your voice and power through civic action, but using your voice, listening and learning and volunteering are the top three. But we should obviously, as leaders, work as hard as we can to present as many opportunities for one to influence, because as you heard me talk about earlier, financial support was sort of that perception and reason for not getting involved. We need to sort of break that down and help others understand the power of the civic circle, of course. And while there are some incredibly high expectations of corporations, the role of consumers with the corporation is less, but that expectation for that company to remain involved and engaged in social issues affecting neighborhoods and communities in which they're present is incredibly, incredibly high. So thank you so much. I'll be back a little bit later and we'll answer any of your research questions. I'm now going to turn it over to Natalie.
Thank you, Derrick. Really appreciate those insights. And I saw a couple of questions came in. One is about the work in India. So Shalabh, so nice to have you. We would love for you to be able to respond to that. And then Derrick, I did also see a question from our audience, which was what month was the research conducted? And this research was actually conducted in January 2022. So it is really hot off the presses and very relevant. So at this time, I'd love to welcome my colleagues, Shalabh Saha and Alana Jorge from India and Brazil, and they are joining us from India and Brazil. Welcome.
Thank you, Natalie. I'm very happy to be here.
Great.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Perfect, perfect. So Shalabh and Alana, your organizations are both members of the Points of Light Global Network, and you are engaged in activating in your local markets. To open, would you please share a little about the work that each of you and your organizations are engaging in, and what is exciting about this research in relationship to the work that you're doing in your communities? Shalabh, why don't we start with you? And thank you. I know it's a little late there, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the opportunity, Natalie. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you. We're so excited by this research, but let me begin by talking about what we do. iVolunteer does a lot of things, everything around volunteering, but the core of it, what we do is to inspire people to volunteer, to inspire more people to volunteer, and to find those models of volunteering and bring volunteer options for people right to the doorstep. We do this by connecting with almost 700 plus nonprofits working across causes across the country. And in the process, we engage about 20,000 volunteers every year. But our effort has been significantly not as much to just multiply this number, but to also focus on the kind of volunteering, and therefore skills-based volunteering, pro bono engagements, more impactful and deeper engagement for volunteers are things that we have been really working on. Which also brings us very much in line with what our corporate partners expect us to do, kind of organize and introduce their own employees to volunteering, and then kind of move up the ladder to more impactful and skills-based volunteering. Of course, in the last, though we started working on virtual volunteering almost about 8-9 years back, the last 2 years have seen a significant jump, and we've pivoted entirely around virtual volunteering these days. What I'm also excited about is that we recently scaled up one of our students programs where we introduced volunteering and community and civic engagement to students from grade 4 to grade 10 in one specific city. And we were able to engage almost 7,500 students within a span of a month. So one of the most exciting programs that we've done more recently. And one of the other marquee programs for us is called Whiteboard, which focuses exclusively on senior management engagement. And I saw in one of Derrick's charts, the expectation of in India of kind of of people to involve more of senior executives or more of management from the corporate side. So those are kind of some of the things that we've been doing. We've of course worked a whole lot on the pandemic and volunteering during that time, but that I think is something that's already spoken about. In this particular research, what I'm most excited about is some of the key things that we sometimes feel, but we never get to see a number of. So for example, virtual, 81% people wanting to volunteer virtually. We knew it is high, but 81% high, we had little idea. And then I think almost all of each of those kind of charts, put India right somewhere over there, that green dot put somewhere over there, right, and it's really, it's exciting and almost unbelievable that it's up there, and so gives a lot of insights to look at that. What are we doing, and a lot of potential out there. And most importantly, it mentioned that volunteering is something which is scoring much higher above giving. And in India, we usually believe that people believe more in giving rather than giving in terms of financial donations, more than volunteering. But this research kind of challenges that notion of ours. So I think there's so many key insights that I'm excited by. Yeah, thanks, Natalie.
Wow, thank you. Yes, it is nice to have research to confirm what it is you feel and you believe, and you have the stories, but it's nice to have the data plus the stories that equals the proof. Alana, welcome again. And if you would share a little bit about Atados and the work that you all are doing, and your excitement about the research and how it impacts the work in your community or communities.
Hello. Well, first of all, thanks for the invite. I'm very happy to be here. And I'll talk about Atados a little. So we were created in 2012 as a platform that connects NGOs and volunteers. Since then, we worked with different NGOs in different areas of Brazil. So a lot of communities, actually, and learn a lot about social engagement. And because of that, now, besides the platform, that is still our core, our love, we have some independent projects, some courses about volunteering management to our partners, and a lot of companies, projects that we help them to develop better and impactful projects too. I think talking about the research specifically, I think an interesting information, besides the volunteering, is that people are more likely to donate in this moment too, because of the pandemic, probably. And this makes a lot of sense for us, because historically, the third sector, the NGOs here in Brazil, has a serious challenge dealing with financial sustainability. And the families suffered a lot in these two last years. And because of that, we had some projects focused on that too. So, for example, Atados created a crowdfunding platform to Good Deeds Day. I don't know if everybody have heard about it here. And the main of the aim of this platform was to tackle hunger. So it was a very successful way of work with this theme. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the research showed that Brazilians want to volunteer a lot more after the pandemic. And we noticed that too on our platform in 2020. Our access increased because more people were looking for ways to help. So it was very cool to see that in the research, because we had this feeling that we are in the right path. And finally, the study showed we have many opportunities to expand engagement, actually, and thinking about the listen and learn, voice, etc. So now we are here in Brazil thinking how we can bring this in a more structured way in Atados too. I think it was this point that I wanted to share.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we all have the opportunity to listen and learn. And it's nice, again, to be able to see the research to confirm what it is that it's happening. And then Shalabh, I also appreciated the remarks about getting people to volunteer and then moving them up into the skills-based volunteering. So I have a specific question, and Alana, I'll ask you if you could get us started. In Derrick's remarks and in the research, he talked about the issues that were most important globally. And Alana, in Brazil, education was a top issue. Can you speak a little bit about how education and the interest in education is showing up in the communities you all work in?
Education was already a very important cause in Atados. We saw this in the platform too until 2019. And with the pandemic, this movement grew because we had a high and negative impact in the education because of the pandemic. For example, in the last year, we had a research, and we discovered that 171% of surge of school dropout in Brazil. So it was a very serious theme for us. Children and youth didn't have the tools to online study, and they were in a new life context too, because many of them were hungry or housekeeping, for example. And we had some projects of equipment donation because this was a very serious demand. but it was a structural challenge too. So we didn't give up and we tried to help this cause with different initiatives. One of them, its name is The Schools and Us. And I swear, I'm talking and now I'm thinking in Portuguese sounds much better, but it's The Schools and Us. Okay, in Portuguese too. In this project, volunteers collected food and distributed to public schools children. It was an emergency action actually, and guaranteed some support to more than 150 families in this moment. So it was great for us. And we created some projects to maintain some contact too, even online. And cartas solidárias in Portuguese, in English, it was like letters to Enem. In Brazil, we have the Enem. It's a test that students do to enter universities. I think you had this too in USA. And they were very anxious about this test, of course, and trying to overcome the pandemic studies challenge. So it was a very difficult time for them. And in this moment, our volunteers wrote letters to the students trying to bring some hope, tips, knowledge for the test. And it was a moment to bring reality closer, but to train the writing too. So it was very, very important to the students. And we had 169 volunteers in this moment too. So it was very, very cool project. And the last one I wanted to share with you, it's another that we named Youth Experience. In Portuguese sounds better too. And in this moment, volunteers and youth talked about the job market, actually in a Zoom meeting. And it was very cool because we had almost 200 youth benefited in this type of project in 2021 with Atados. And we saw how they grew with us, you know. So we had some great projects and results last year. I wanted to talk about education. It makes a lot of sense to us that it's an important cause for Brazilians too.
Yeah, those are some of the strategies that you all implemented. They're very insightful, particularly when you sending the letters. It is to cheer them up, but it's also to teach them writing skills. And the disruption in education, again, is a shared experience globally because children were, for those who attend school outside of the home, that experience was disrupted. Shalabh, I have maybe just a different angle for you, because in India, the research showed that mental health was also a leading issue and area of concern, right behind one's physical health. From your work, do you see the role of volunteering and civic engagement in mental health and well-being? How do you see that?
Thanks, Natalie. Thanks for that very special question. I do want to kind of go back to what Lana was also saying, that education remains the most popular cause in India as well. It has always been, and even as part of this research, it has been the top cause, followed closely by environment and climate change is on the rise. And so that's what we've been seeing. And again, the research also shows the same. But the surprise, however, that has come up, like you mentioned, is health features at number 2. Now, health has not usually been a cause that has been ranked so high in India. Other causes have taken overswing. I feel that it is possibly a lot to do with the pandemic, and the survey was conducted right after the pandemic. So I think people are much more conscious about health right now and about well-being. Also, I think when people were spending more time indoors with their families and they were seeing sufferings around, I think that also gave a lot of rise to concern on community and personal and family well-being. Having said that, at iVolunteer, during the peak of the pandemic, we organized several trainings and sessions, 2 of them specifically being, one was helping nonprofit managers and nonprofit staff preparing for virtual work in life, because we felt that they were kind of they didn't have the access to resources that a lot of corporate people had, but they had to face even more demands from the community, and that was leading to a lot of stress amongst the nonprofit professionals. So how do you kind of bring a changeover and prepare for that stress-busting situation? The second is this was specifically focused on nonprofit managers. But then we realized that this, stress busting was something that was a very common requirement across the people, whether it was students or it was non-profit managers or it was even volunteers. And so we organized, we got professional volunteers to organize stress busting sessions and mental well-being sessions. So this is how we kind of, helped alleviate a bit of stress on people. But let me go back to about almost 2 years back. We did conduct a study of our own on volunteering and well-being. And the question that we wanted to really address was that, does volunteering create happiness, or do happy people tend to volunteer more? Interestingly, and thankfully the response that majorly came out was that volunteering creates more happiness. And I think that's a simple tool. It goes on to say that, even in these stressful times as well, when we see people wanting to volunteer more, and when they're kind of, at the same point of time facing those mental well-being challenges more, the two of them go hand in hand. You volunteer more and you reduce the stress. You volunteer more and you alleviate kind of, other stress as well. Almost 96% of people that we asked 2 years back, they had responded saying that they feel better about themselves when they volunteer. And when we spoke about this specifically of well-being in the workplace related to corporate volunteering, more than half the people said that they showed better empathy at workplace after they began volunteering. And it also, almost about 20% of them said that they felt that they were better able to deal with adverse circumstances, again, because so I think the volunteering and well-being go very much hand in hand. And this is something that we kind of, we've learned through practice, through research, and now evidently what we're seeing around us. Having said that, I do also want, one specific point that I kind of, picked on from the research outcomes that Derrick shared is that, while of the three factors that are there, the intentionally helped category of where people kind of, help intentionally, poverty and homelessness was still the top cause compared to others. Now, what this leads me to believe is that, we're also a country where things are changing and evolving. So poverty and homelessness is something which people feel very attached to. And this is where the kind of, the intentional help goes. Whereas a lot of other things, including education and environment, are things that people want to, support through a voice or support through learning. But when it came to poverty and homelessness, it was intentionally help. And I think that's something also I picked off slightly differently in this research, and I wanted to point it out. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I think the quotable moment there is, does volunteering create more happiness, or do happy people volunteer more? And it goes back to one of the research findings that Derrick had in the headline is action promotes action. So yes, volunteering creates more happiness, and it contributes to your well-being. Thank you so much for the insights on mental health, but definitely the insights on education and creative ways to engage your community with education. And we have a couple more minutes before we open it up to questions, because I'm sure our audience would love to ask you a couple of questions. But the last question that I'll ask, it might be the last question, but this is really about corporate engagement. In the research, in both India and Brazil, the response was high expectations for corporate engagement, particularly on social issues. Two questions is, one, does that surprise you? And two, why do you think the numbers and the expectation is so high? So Alana.
This is a new information for sure, but it makes sense actually. So it didn't surprise me. However, I don't know the answer. It's like a very difficult question. But when we think about the companies that work with Atados, for example, they are always focused on creating new forms of social impact, or thinking about ESG too, of course, because it's the word of the moment, and probably because had already seen this demand from consumers too. So it makes sense because of this, but we don't know why these numbers are so high in Brazil. I was thinking that maybe it has a connection with the size of the country and with the lack of confidence that Brazilians have with the government now. We had a research in 2021 now, and about that actually, and it's consistently increasing since the pandemic. So I don't know, I think maybe we're putting our expectations or corporations as we have been disappointed with the government in the last years, you know. This makes a lot of sense because of this, but I wanted to deep dive into this too, because I wanted to know better why this happens, and I think it's a great theme that for next research.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing about research is sometimes what you see confirms what you know, but then oftentimes there is something that you really did not know, and it leads to a question for the next body of work. So Shalabh, what about you? What are your thoughts around this?
Not at all surprised. I think the only surprise is a huge number, that 95% was a complete outlier. But I'm not surprised at all that the number is high enough. I think awareness in India is at an all-time high. The media is active and social media is super active. And I think this leads to a lot of accountability extraction from all aspects of the society. That includes the corporates as well. And the consumers and the employees are feeling much more empowered to ask the questions. So I think it's definitely there. But the other aspect also to be seen over here is that in India specifically, the customers expect the companies to do more, but they don't necessarily want that the companies expect the customers to engage with them in doing it. I think that also leads to somewhere possibly maybe trust issues, saying that, okay, I want to see you doing first, and I don't ask me to come along with you because I don't know where you're going. So maybe it'll be some time before companies have kind of gained that trust, or brands have gained that trust, where their customers are willing to kind of join them in their own efforts as well. The other aspect that I really feel is that employees want a lot of options for volunteering, and that is not something I think that is on the rise right now. For quite some time, the corporates direct the kind of volunteering to causes and programs that they support. But I think people also want more of a choice, and that is also something that's coming across loud and clear. And that's something for us to work on as well.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. At this time, we'll invite Derrick to join us. Thank you, Derrick. And there is one question we have a number of questions, and thank you, Amber, for your questions. I think some of them were answered during our conversation. So I'll start with this question from Gabrielle. And the question is, are companies and citizens aware that citizens count on them to tackle the social issues, mainly in Brazil and India? So you have the citizens that are saying, yes, we expect companies to do something, but are companies aware of this? And if they are not, what would you recommend as activists and leaders in the community? What would you recommend as to how we would inform companies? Either one, either both Shalabh and Alana, and then Derrick, either from this research or from other research, your expert knowledge. Thanks.
So, quick note, I think, companies is a huge continuum, huge spectrum. And I feel that the really large brands and the large companies are very much conscious about the expectations from the citizens. The small to medium size are largely kind of, still shy away from this, is my belief.
I think we have to, what Shalabh said, it's fundamental, because I think we have to think about what companies are we talking about too. When we talk about the medium or small companies, I think they don't have this knowledge, this conscious. And maybe the moments of listen and learn and voice can be very useful in this company specifically. So we are saying in Brazil that many companies that are ready, maybe they aren't ready for the volunteering, but they want to learn. So they are asking for some courses or some talks about causes, about volunteering, about engagement. And so I think it's a good way to get this. And I wanted to talk about a thing that it's related to in 2021, yeah, last year. We did a research in Brazil, much smaller research, but we wanted to understand what drives our volunteers from our network specifically. And we discovered something very interesting, and I think this makes a lot of sense when we talk about Civic Circle and the companies. More than 80% of people do their first volunteering with friends or family, or friends from the companies, from the work. So this showed us the potential that a person has to be a point of social impact of life. And I think we have to think about, to talk with these companies about that too. How can we create a movement inside of the company and make this happen?
Perfect. Derrick, a couple of insights, and then we have one last quick question before we wrap up.
Yeah, Natalye, I mean, we work with brands around the globe, and it was interesting. I was just in Europe having this conversation with several brands around similar conversation around consumer interests and expectations. And there's two things that I often remind companies around this space is that they are mostly aware of what I would call the activist consumer interests, and not necessarily always aware of the consumer interest of those that are not the most vocal. And one of the things that's really, really important that brands and companies do or must do is look beyond sort of just the activist, the socially conscious consumer, to also understand sort of the regular values-based consumer as well, that has an interest in that the company does good work because they see that company around them, like we talk about in the research. But oftentimes I find companies focused on the most vocal consumer and not the whole spectrum.
Thank you. That's great advice. And so as we wrap up, first of all, this research would not be possible without our partners. And so we have to say a special thanks to AT&T for their very generous donation and investment in this research for the past 3 years. And so thank you so much. But if we were looking at one other area of interest, we have 2 minutes for 3 people. What other areas of interest do you have around research?
Can I? Oh, okay. Go, Shalabh. Go.
Yeah. I think what is competing for mind space when it comes to civic action and volunteering? There is so many distractions these days: entertainment, social media, travel. So what are we competing against as civic space? Yeah.
Perfect. Great. Alana.
Okay, I'll try to be fast. Other theme that I have much interest in, actually, and we've thought about this too in Atados last year, was the maintenance of the engagement. After this volunteer moment, how can we maintain this person with us in other projects or in the same project? What makes a person to connect with the third sector? We already know that the relationship between volunteer and NGO staff changes the experience for better, but what exactly do we do to reach this, So this is a thing that we love to see.
Perfect. And last word, thank you to our guests. Derrick, anything that you haven't seen that you'd love for some research to share some insights on?
Well, there's so many because we do a lot of research, but I'll have to say that I think we're at a time right now where and it relates a lot to the listen and learn, the role that companies can really play as an educator and being an informant on social issues and attaching some metrics to that. Like, what do we really want to do to change knowledge, shift attitudes, and sort of nudge behaviors? Can't be responsible for all behavior, but can start to nudge people towards the right way. So perfect. I think that there's some really good interest there.
Well, perfect. Well, we've had a great hour. Thank you so much, Derrick, for your partnership, Alana and Shalabh for your partnership, and to everyone joining us. Have a great day.